What's up, my wizards? Welcome back to SBMTG. I'm Devin. I got another deck tech for you today. This one you can probably tell I'm pretty excited about. This is 4-color dragons. A couple of people suggested I do this, so went ahead and made this for us. Today we're going to go ahead and take a look at this. Well, for the 4 colors, I went with everything except for green. And this deck plays, well, kind of a lot like a control deck. It's obviously kind of mid-rangey. There's 13 creatures overall, there's 20 spells overall, but a lot of those spells are the same spells we'll see in some control builds, and it really plays the same way that a lot of control decks play. And it sides out into blue-black control, if you want to do that, or it sides out into Esper control, whatever you want to do with that. So, that in mind, let's go ahead and move ahead, talk about all the dragons in the deck. 3 copies of Thunderbreak Regent. These are lowest costed creature. It's a 4-drop, lowest costed creature. Thunderbreak Regent is obviously very good. We play more copies of him than anything in the deck except for Stormbreath Dragon. His ability is just crazy. Anytime they try to do anything to any of your dragons, they're taking 3 at least. And that is invaluable. It's one of the most important things in the deck, honestly. It forces them to really decide whether or not they want to do that right now. Playing 3 copies of Stormbreath Dragon, still one of the best dragons in the format for a long time, and for a long time to come. So yeah, definitely 3 copies of Stormbreath. The Pro White is super awesome. The Monstrous is super awesome. And yeah, whatever. All the stuff that this guy does is good, and he's never been bad, and he won't ever be bad. Playing 2 copies of Dragonlord Ojutai, one of the best cards in the deck. Dragonlord Ojutai is phenomenal, it turns out. Really don't have to give too much reason. I said this plays like a control deck, and this is a really good card for control decks. It's kind of like built specifically for that. You enjoy it when you get it, because it often wins the game for you. A lot of these dragons do that. That's what dragons do throughout Magic history. They win the game when you drop them, and that's why we built a dragons deck. We got 1 copy. This is where the silver bullets start. We got 1 copy of Sunscorch Regent. I had a couple of people in a couple of different videos comment and say like, oh, Sunscorch Regent's pretty good for this that you're doing. And I was like, you know, at the time I was like, well, I just like this card better or whatever. He is really good, it turns out. There are cards in the format that he's not good against. Obviously, he still dies to a broad set of removal. But it turns out this card is good in a lot of situations. We're going to be Crux of Fating a good amount. We're going to be removing a lot of creatures. And once we drop Regent, it's going to be tough for them to catch up. Anything they attempt to do to catch up gives us a small but noticeable advantage. We got 1 copy of Silumgar, the Drifting Death. Another guy with hexproof. That's very important in this control-y sort of build. And yeah, that whenever a dragon you control swings, their guys get neg1, that gets out of hand. Had 1 copy of Dragonlord Silumgar. We don't want too many of these things. Not just because of the legendary status, but just because I really feel like you're in danger of getting this guy removed and messing your whole plan up. But I mean, I'm not going to say that he's bad. Silumgar is quite good, really can swing the game for you. And you'll want to totally play him and just grab like huge dudes with him and stuff. Like grab their Sarkhan, how hilarious is that? 1 copy of the most flexible slot in the deck. Kolaghan's the Storm's Fury. Just like with the Drifting Death, that's Silumgar, this Kolaghan can get out of hand relatively quickly. With the dash, this can really surprise them, take them off guard. It does feel like win more, and you can just win like a control deck, but this can just win the game immediately as soon as you drop it. I was just kind of threw him in there, you know, to begin with, kind of like, oh, we'll see what he does. He does things. I like him. And lastly, we've got 1 copy of Dragonlord Kolaghan. The give all your creatures haste thing is relevant in a thing where all your guys have at least 4 power and they all fly, you know. So all your guys have haste is relevant. You don't run across too many situations unless you're playing against very dedicated control builds or aggro decks that run, you know, 4 copies of every single card that they run. Where that second ability is important. But it does put pressure on people. It definitely makes people think. A lot of people have had a lot of flack to give Dragonlord Kolaghan, but I think he's fairly good. Again, one of the more flexible slots in the deck, but better than anticipated. On to the spells. We got 20 spells, and it's a little bit more consistent, but not so much. Again, this is a control deck, so we're going to be playing singletons of things. First of all, we're playing 2 copies of Thoughtseize in the main deck. A lot of what you'll notice here is just covering the early game for us so that we can get to our fat dudes in the late game. The Thoughtseize is good at doing that, and it is good in this deck because it do that. It takes away their, you know, 2nd, 3rd, 4th turn plays, and those are the turns that we are quite vulnerable on, so yes, Thoughtseize. for the same reason, but for different reasons. 2 copies of Wild Slash, again, to protect against aggro. We've seen this in other decks. A lot of decks play Wild Slash. There's a reason for that, because a lot of other decks play creatures with 2 or less toughness. So Wild Slash to cover us in the early game. 3 copies of an interesting card here. This is Dragon Roar. We're playing 13 dragons in the deck. That gives us a pretty good chance that we're going to have a dragon in our hand or in play somewhere. So we've got 3 copies of Dragon Roar, and in just a second we'll see 3 copies of another card like this. And Dragon Roar works a lot of the time and is kind of strictly better than Lightning Strike and takes out a lot of the things that they're going to play up until the 3rd, sometimes 4th turn, and it usually hits for the other 3. So added value is added value, which is good. 3 copies of Silumgar's Scorn. The first 3 or 4 turns, Silumgar's Scorn is always good. That extra 1 mana, they're sometimes not going to have. I mean, this is a game of turns and a game of curves is what we're playing right now in Standard. And Silumgar's Scorn is fine even if you don't have the dragon, but a lot of the time you very much will. So, yeah, good card. Strict counter most of the time, and again, we're playing control, so we like those. We got 1 copy of Valorous Stance in this thing. This does a couple of things. Again, it protects us in the early to mid-ish game. We're playing, a lot of people are playing Siege Rhino on the 3rd, sometimes, turn. So Valorous Stance is going to help cover the 3rd, 4th turn where we are still somewhat vulnerable, and it's going to help us when mass removal hits, or targeted removal even. We got 1 copy of Roast in here. Sort of controversial. I went with this over Ultimate Price, mostly because we have an enormous problem with Siege Rhino, as a lot of decks do, and Roast totally takes him out, along with literally 10 out of 10 the other 100% of the other aggro cards that we're going to see. In aggro we have sort of a problem against, honestly, so we got to have either Ultimate Price or Roast or similar low-costed removal, Bile Blight, something like that. And I went with Roast over any of those other cards in the main deck because I think that it specifically handles a creature that we have a specific problem with. 3 copies of Hero's Downfall because it's strict removal and kills Planeswalkers and is good. It's the best removal in the format. 3 copies of this in a control-y, mid-rangey thing. You probably saw this coming eventually. 2 copies of Sarkhan's Triumph. Obviously, there's a toolbox of dragons here. We see a lot of 1-ofs and a lot of 2-ofs. And so, Sarkhan's Triumph is something we definitely need. We'll usually play it 5th turn. It's usually remove a guy, Sarkhan's Triumph, and then our next turn we'll play a huge dragon. And that's usually pretty good for us, honestly. Sarkhan's Triumph allows us to utilize the toolbox in any way that we see fit at the time being. It really enables the toolbox strategy and the creature structure. And so, yeah, Sarkhan's Triumph. We're playing the card because it's kind of tailor-made for something like this. We have 3 copies of Crux of Fate in this deck for incredibly obvious reasons. If there's one obvious non-creature card that goes in the deck, it is this card. Yeah, I don't have to explain Crux of Fate. A lot of the time it does what you want it to do. It wipes out everything except for your guy. Relevant, right? In a control thing, we want this. I'm talking too much about this card. I mean, Crux of Fate in a Dragon's deck, play it. Now, while I display the lands over here, which the land base was probably the hardest part of this entire deck to build. So take all of that in and, take issue with it if you want, because this is an incredibly hard mana base to build. I'm going to talk a bit about some cards that I didn't use before I move on to addressing the board just a little bit. And, yeah, these are the cards I considered and wanted to use, but didn't really find a place for. I wanted to use Sarkhan the Dragon Speaker, but I realized that it was more of a thematic inclusion. Obviously, this is a good card, but just didn't feel right. It was kind of clunky, all things considered, and it just didn't make the final cut. I wanted to play Foul Tongue Invocation somewhere in the 75 cards, and some people will probably take issue with the non-inclusion here. Just a creature off the board in 4 life was good. This is one of the better cards I didn't end up including, but I just felt like we had better removal options in the main than this. I also wanted to play Dragon Tempest, but realized that was just a pipe dream pretty quick. And obviously this is hilarious, but just isn't there. And finally, I didn't put in Crucible of the Spirit Dragon. Crucible of the Spirit Dragon just didn't feel right. There are 2, as you'll notice, Haven of the Spirit Dragon. That started off as 1, but I realized that I could probably increase it to 2 and stay safe and still be able to play our spells. We are playing 27 lands. That's a control level of lands. We really need our drops. Not only is this controlling, not only are we very high curve, but we have 4 colors in the deck. We need our land drops. So we're playing a pretty high amount of lands here. And we have to play our spells. So didn't think Crucible was quite good enough to make it. with that, let's briefly discuss our board. I'm just going to post it up right here. You take a look at that. If you'll notice, the first 5-6 slots there are all devoted to a switch a board out into either Esper or just blue-black or even blue-white control. Or we don't handle the early game as well as a dedicated control deck will. That's why you see the other Thoughtseize, the Ultimate Price, the Valorous Stance, the Bile-Blights are very important against aggro, and there's a lot of mid-range decks and devotion decks that we just, even when we get to the long game, they've already blown past us. So I think siding out to a dedicated control strategy is not only a fun way to go, but the right way to go in a lot of ways. And they won't see it coming either. Well, that's all for 4-color dragons for right now. Let us know how you felt about this. If you enjoyed this content, please subscribe to our channel. We're SBMTG, strictly better MTG on YouTube. Please share our content. That helps us so much. You have no idea. Comment. We really want to know how you felt about not just this deck, but other deck techs and deck techs to come that we want to do. Just so you know, I'm thinking about 2 decks for our next deck tech, and I want your input on which one you want to see. I want to do either mono green Stompy a la Surak and maybe Avatar the Resolute. I've got a lot of ideas for this deck. Or if you want to see Super Friends, I'm thinking maybe Esper Super Friends, but we could even do 4 or 5 color Super Friends because that's just too fun to not do. So let us know what you want us to do next time, and we will totally do it. At SBMTG, I'm Devin, and I will be with you guys next time with more cool content. We've got more than just deck techs, so stop by our channel or look in the description below for more stuff, or you can check out any of these videos for more awesome, super cool, sometimes funny, sometimes stupid, and sometimes actually insightful commentary on Magic the Gathering. Thank y'all so much for joining us. I'll see you next time, Wizards.